You're all welcome. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor to address you today on behalf of the African Development Bank Group President and Chairman of the Board of Directors, Dr. Akinwumi Adesina, at the presentation of the 2025 edition of Africa's Macroeconomic Performance and Outlook. Africa, like other regions, continues to grapple with multiple shocks such as tightening global financial conditions, geopolitical tensions, elevated public debt, persistent inflation, climate-related disasters, and structural bottlenecks. These challenges complicate policy-making and investment decisions, necessitating continuous reassessment of macroeconomic conditions in our various countries and across the continent. Against this backdrop, the 2025 edition of Africa's Macroeconomic Performance and Outlook provides an evidence-based assessment of recent trends and short to medium-term economic prospects. While acknowledging Africa's resilience, the report advocates bold policy actions to sustain economic recovery and mitigate risks. My remarks today will focus on 5 key areas. One is the GDP growth and outlook. The second one is macroeconomic fundamentals. The third is sovereign debt dynamics, then domestic resource mobilization and policy priorities for enhancing resilience. On Africa's GDP growth and outlook, in 2024, Africa's average real GDP growth was estimated at 3.2%, mirroring 2023 levels, but below the 7% minimum required to significantly reduce poverty on the continent. Growth upticks were recorded in 30 out of 54 countries, largely driven by improvements in hydrocarbons, tourism, agriculture, and private investment. Looking ahead, Africa's GDP growth is projected to rise to 4.1% in 2025 and 4.4% in 2026, supported by economic reforms, easing inflationary pressures, and improved fiscal positions. Notably, Africa is expected to be the second fastest growing region after Asia, with 12 of the world's 20 fastest growing economies in 2025 being on the continent. However, despite these positive projections, regional variations persist and risks remain. A reversal in global disinflation trends and fiscal tightening in advanced economies could delay Africa's economic recovery. Now, on the macroeconomic fundamentals, inflation remains a key challenge. It's averaging about 18.6%. It averaged about 18.6% in 2024, far above the the medium-term target. It's expected to decline to 12.6% between 2025 and 2026 due to continued monetary tightening. Fiscal deficits widened slightly from 4.4% of GDP in 2023 to 4.6% in 2024, but is projected to narrow to 4.1% in 2025 to 2026, but is still above the 3% macroeconomic convergence target. Currency depreciation persisted in 2024 despite the easing of global financial conditions, reflecting that there are lingering monetary tightening in advanced economies, which is affecting our own continent. The current account deficit widened from 1.6% of GDP in 2023 to 2.4% in 2024. And these are due to trade deficits and declining net income. However, external financial flows rebounded by 8.7% to 207.9 billion in 2023, and this is driven by a reduction in net portfolio outflows. On Africa's sovereign debt dynamics, tight global financial conditions are slowly easing, aiding fiscal consolidation and debt reduction. Africa's median debt to GDP ratio declined to 60% in 2024 from 66% 63.5% in 2021-2023, and is expected to drop further to 59.2% in this year. However, there are debt vulnerabilities that remain very high. Rising debt service costs are driven by global interest rates, and a strong US dollar continues to strain our economies in Africa. As of September 2024, 9 African countries were in debt distress, with 11 others at high risk of debt distress. Debt accumulation is increasingly driven by exchange rate depreciation and interest expenses, with over 70% of Africa's debt denominated in foreign currency. External liquidity pressures are mounting, as reflected in the rising debt to service exports ratio, which increased from 22% between the years 2015 to 2019 to 29.2% in 2020, while it's estimated at 22% in 2024, is expected to increase to 22.7% this year. On domestic resource mobilization, African countries continue to struggle with revenue generation. Government revenue, excluding grants, fell from 23.1% of GDP in 2010 to 20.2% in 2022, mainly due to declining tax revenue, which dropped from 15.8% to 14.8% of GDP. And this is below the 15% threshold needed for sustainable development financing. This decline stems from inefficient tax collection, limited digitalization, and a large informal sector across the continent. Africa's tax to GDP ratio remains significantly lower than Latin America's, which is at 23.9%, and Europe at 31.7%. Therefore, strengthening tax administrations and addressing institutional inefficiencies are critical for improving domestic resource mobilization in our countries. Policy priorities for enhancing Africa's economic resilience. As Africa navigates an increasingly complex economic landscape, policymakers must adopt a forward-looking approach to reinforce resilience and drive sustainable growth. The macroeconomic performance and outlook proposes key actions for the short as well as medium to long term. Short-term priorities. One is to better calibrate and coordinate monetary and fiscal policies. Central banks should maintain contractionary monetary policy while governments prioritize social safety nets to protect vulnerable populations. The second thing is building foreign reserve buffers. We need to find a way to grow our economy in order to strengthen our reserves, and this will enhance resilience to external shocks and mitigate currency depreciation effects. Preemptive debt restructuring. Countries that are at high risk should proactively restructure debt to prevent distress and default, which will definitely cost the countries more. We also have some medium to long-term priorities. First of all is in investing in integrated infrastructure. Mobilizing domestic and foreign capital for infrastructure projects will boost productivity and economic diversification. The second is enhancing the business environment. Reforms, including modernizing regulations, improving standards, and supporting investment-friendly policies, will be essential for attracting private sector participation in our economies. The third one is fostering economic diversification. Supporting national champions and strengthening backward and forward linkages with small enterprises will deepen our domestic markets. And the fourth one is leveraging franchising and foreign expertise. We need to encourage cross-border investments and knowledge transfer to accelerate our industrialization on the continent. Number 5, reforming the international financial system. Addressing Africa's access to affordable capital is vital for sustainable development in Africa. And number 6, strengthening fiscal rules and transparency. We need to establish clear mandates for fiscal councils and debt management offices, which will enhance accountability and reduce fiscal distress for our countries. And lastly, improving domestic revenue mobilization. We have to enhance our tax collection systems, reduce inefficiencies, and adopt digital technologies, and we need to prioritize this in order to increase government revenue sustainably. In conclusion, 2 points. Africa's economic resilience and growth prospects remain strong, but challenges persist. Therefore, addressing inflation, strengthening fiscal policies, and ensuring sustainable debt management will be crucial for maintaining economic stability. Structural reforms and strategic investments will further enhance Africa's capacity to navigate global shocks and sustain long-term growth. Secondly, Africa has the potential to drive global economic expansion in the coming years, but realizing this potential will require decisive and well-coordinated policy actions by our governments. This may seem difficult, but it is not impossible if governments make it a key development agenda. Thank you very much.